Okay, we're recording now.
Great.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. My name is Lori Schreier. I live in southern New Hampshire in Westmoreland and close to Keene. So if any of you are in this area and want to contact me, please do. I've been involved with New Hampshire for Safe Technology and on these issues for a couple of years now. Especially dealing with some issues that had come up in Keene a while back and are still going on with new 5G towers going up. I became aware of my own sensitivity a couple of years ago and then started looking at the science and was really convinced that I needed to take measures to protect myself and to get active. So it's good to see more and more people becoming active on these issues and protecting themselves. So the mission of New Hampshire Safe Tech is to educate residents of New Hampshire and all over, and legislators, and to provide suggestions and solutions to protect ourselves and to build protective policy. We especially like to promote the suggestions that came out of the New Hampshire Commission to study the health and environmental effects of evolving 5G technology. And their report came out in November 2020 with 17 really good recommendations. And we're still trying in New Hampshire to bring some of those forward into actual legislation. And I want to thank two of our members who can't be here today, Jen White and Deb Hodgson, who started this group. And they continue to support this group through emails and the Facebook page and supporting these webinars twice a month. And Cece Doucette, who's here, is our presenter and mentor and speaks all over the country and soon all over the world, I have a feeling, on these topics. And I want to welcome you, Cece, once again to these free webinars. So spread the word because we'll be doing them, and we have been, twice a month, and Cece will tell you more about her background and experience as she does her wonderful slideshow.
So, thank you so much, Lori, and thank you for sticking with this and doing what you can. You know we all do this on borrowed time, and we're just so grateful and honored to be standing shoulder to shoulder with so many people across the country, and as you said, across the world, who are working on educating. That seems to be the crux of how we get into the solutions, is to just bring the information forward, because without that, people feel paralyzed when you present the risk and then they don't know what to do about it. So what I'd like to do to start with is to share a set of slides that I have built, and let me put that in slide view mode. And we will provide these to you later this week. We need to render the video, and then we'll send out the video and the slides so that everybody has these resources. So, whoops, that didn't quite go. Things are a little slow today, including myself. But let's see if there we go. Okay, sometimes Zoom is just slow, but this is what our slides will look like. And again, thank you so much to Lori, Jen, and Deb for their leadership in New Hampshire on this, and all the others who take the time to be with us. So this MTPW after my name just means that I had the privilege of earning a master's in technical and professional writing from Northeastern University, where I also earned a bachelor's in communication studies. And I never imagined this is where my skill set would take me. But I'm so blessed that I can talk to people and hopefully convey information in a way that's easily accessible and understandable. So I got involved with this issue way back in 2013 at book group one night. My girlfriend Wendy was reading a book called Zapped by Anne Louise Gittleman. And she's an electrical engineer, and she tipped us off that there looks to be biological effects from all of today's wireless technology. It doesn't matter if it's coming from a cell tower or from our own personal wireless devices. And so being a tech writer, I thought, I wonder if there's anything to back that up. And so I started looking for the science, and I was just astounded to find literally thousands and thousands of studies published all over the world showing great biological effects. So we'll go through the science in a few minutes and we'll show you the long-term effects and the short-term effects. And then we'll talk about solutions. So I helped my schools after a very difficult conversation, many difficult conversations actually, to be the first in the country to put up this little sign in our classrooms called Best Practices for Mobile Devices, with just baby steps to say, turn off these devices when we're not using them, because the industry just gives us everything, all Wi-Fi all the time. And until we know the risks, we just go along with it. Turn the Wi-Fi on, like our routers, our access points, only for as long as you actually need it. Don't just let them running because they're pulsing microwave radiation all the time. And as we'll see in a minute, always place a device away from the body on a solid surface, not in your hand, not in your lap, not in your pockets. And we'll tell you why in just a little bit. And then my brain goes towards solutions. So I thought, wow, why doesn't anybody know about this? And so I went and I met with my state senator, Karen Spilka, and she is now our Senate president here in Massachusetts. And she and I had worked together for years on our local education foundation, and we brought in all this wireless technology through fundraising campaigns. So I met her for local coffee hours and I taught her the science, and I showed her the radiation coming off of her cell phone and her district director's laptop, and both devices went way off the charts into the red zone on a radiation detection meter. And she's looking at me like, really? And I said, yes, and nobody knows. Is there something from where you sit that we could at least give the public the right to know, just like we ultimately did with other toxins like cigarettes and tobacco and drugs and other addictions like gambling and pornography? People should at least have the right to know so they can then make their choices. But it's our moral obligation to protect our collective children. So Senator Spilka put me with a lawyer in her office, and we crafted a very simple bill that would just simply bring the right minds together at the state level, look at the facts, the science, public policy, and then decide what to do. So we've had bills here in Massachusetts for going on 10 years now. And although we've made some progress, we have yet to pass any legislation, but New Hampshire did. And we'll go through a little more detail on New Hampshire's groundbreaking commission report in just a little while. On this journey, I was introduced to Dr. Deborah Davis, who's a Nobel Peace Prize co-laureate on climate change with Al Gore's team. And she figured out what was going on with wireless. And now she has built the Environmental Health Trust, which is arguably the world's greatest database on all of this information. And it's a scientific think tank as well. So if you go to Environmental Health Trust, you'll find the incredible work that they continue to do today. And she introduced me to folks over in Europe who were starting to figure out that we can't fix this wireless issue until people know about it. So I volunteered my time with this group in Europe, and we built a little nonprofit called Wireless Education. And we actually now have an off-the-shelf course that anybody can take in about a half an hour online. It's called our Schools and Families course. So we could literally train your entire school district. We could train your entire municipality, your entire workforce at work in about a half an hour online. And it provides you at the end with a tip sheet of handy reminders you can print out. And it also provides a certificate of completion to give to your human resource group to certify that you have actually taken this training and passed. So we have so many amazing resources today that we didn't have a decade ago when I fell down the rabbit hole. On this journey, I went to a forum at our state house here in Massachusetts that Dr. Deborah Davis and other world-leading experts came to our state house and did a forum to give people the right to know. And I, for 2 years, was the only person I knew who was working on this locally. And how heartwarming was it to walk into the Massachusetts State House and go into a chamber where it was standing room only, full of people who understood what this issue is. So subsequent to that, having met others in the state, we formed Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And this is our website. Folks across the country have reached out to me and said, hey, Cece, I like what you did. Do you mind if we just kind of borrow your format? And I'm a big fan of not reinventing the wheel. So if anything that we've done can help you where you are, please just reach out and let us know, and we'd be happy to guide you along the way. So great resources here for the science, for state level efforts that we've been working on. We also have a page for the news stories that are run locally, either through local papers or cable stations or other outlets. Because when we start these conversations with others, the industry's pretty much convinced our towns that, oh, nobody else cares about this issue. You know, it's just the NIMBYs, not in my backyard people who don't want a cell tower near them. But that simply is not true. And by having that news page at Massachusetts for Safe Technology, it makes it easy for you to say, hey, look at all these other towns who are heavily involved in this issue. Our town is falling behind the 8 ball. We also have a page there for events. So like this webinar that we're co-hosting with you today, we list all of the events that we know of that are coming up in the local area and invite anybody to come to those and just continue to learn along with us. So please use the resources at Massachusetts for Safe Technology to help you help others. I like to share this link too. In 2018, I was invited to be the co-chair for the technology panel at the Health and Buildings Roundtable Conference that was held at the National Institutes of Health. And this was a gathering of many of our federal agencies, hospitals, urban planners, architects, building biologists. And for the first time, we got to introduce the issues surrounding wireless technology. And so I love to share this link. It's a really good resource for you when you're opening this conversation, because all of our talks had to be 10 minutes or less. So it's a very good, highly credible way for you to introduce this topic to others in your community. We had Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada. He came to tell us that his industry should and can be doing better with a nudge. We had Theodora Scarrato, who's the executive director of the Environmental Health Trust, to share with us what's happening internationally and inspire us with communities in Italy and Belgium and elsewhere that are already getting wireless out of the schools. And we also had with us Dr. Martin Pall, P-A-L-L, Martin Pall, who's one of the world's leading scientists on radio frequency radiation and the biological effects. So, and we also had Peter Sullivan. Now, Peter, I found his work through a talk that he gave at a conference online in the autism community. And Peter had been a fighter pilot in his earlier days, kind of like Top Gun. And so he was up there at the really high levels of natural radiation or electromagnetic fields, up there in the sky, but he was also in a fighter plane that had radar equipment on it and then all the instrumentation inside the plane. So Peter got very heavily exposed to microwave radiation. So can I please ask whoever is not muted to please mute your microphone? Thank you so much. So Peter wound up getting really sick. He dropped a lot of weight. His teeth were getting very brittle, and other microwave sickness symptoms. And then when he had his family, both of his boys, when they came in through the preschool years, wound up on the autism spectrum. And so Peter, did what a lot of parents will do, go to a clean organic diet so you're not adding to the body burden. Do the heavy metal detox to get the heavy metals that can be neurotoxic out of the body. And today he will tell families as a first line of defense, do the digital detox. create a sanctuary at home for at least 12 hours at night where there's no microwave radiation. So lo and behold, both of Peter's sons are now grown men, and neither of them is any longer on that autism spectrum. And I didn't even know that was a possibility. But apparently there's something called de novo mutations, which means it didn't come through mom's bloodline, it didn't come through dad's genes, it came from somewhere in the environment. And we don't want to overpromise anything because we are all very different biologically, individually. But we hear time and again from the building biologists, that's a whole profession dedicated to this, and we'll give you a link to the Building Biology Institute. But we hear their miracles all the time where they just go in and clean up all these man-made energies and remove other exposures to environmental toxins in the home. And they see miracles all the time with people improving their health in very short order. So please share these videos if you would like to get a quick hit on high credibility. And then one of the major gaps I recognized that we had when I started learning about this, a decade ago, is so many people I was finding were getting sick from today's wireless radiation emissions. And they would go to their doctors and they would share their symptoms. The doctors would run the tests they knew to run and come up empty and say, I don't know why you're feeling so sick. And then sick people would start paying out of pocket to go see specialists, spending tens of thousands of dollars. The specialists would run their tests and once again come up empty. And so we are so very grateful that since then we've had 2 medical conferences. The most recent one was held in 2021, which we recognize was when the pandemic was going full tilt. And so rather than meeting out in Scottsdale, Arizona, we had to pivot. And bless Elizabeth Kelly, who's the executive director, she pivoted and she got this medical conference done online, which was no small feat and it was expensive to do. She got 24.5 continuing medical education credits, not only for doctors, but she went down the second track and got that training accredited for nurses as well. So anybody who needs healthcare, any licensed healthcare practitioner who needs continuing medical education credits, I urge you to go to our website at Mass for Safe Technology, where we have a letter on our resources page that you can give today to your doctors, your dentists, your physical therapist, your other therapists, any healthcare practitioners that you are supported by really should be trained in this new field of medicine. So I was very honored to help Elizabeth Kelly plan that medical conference and then to be invited in as an accredited speaker on state and local policy. So a lot of what I presented at the medical conference we'll cover today in the next hour and a half. All right. So that's how I got involved. And I think that sign that we have hanging in our classrooms came about when our town and our schools looked at the legal fine print that comes with all of our devices. So if anybody watching with us today has an iPhone, I invite you to take that out right now and go into settings. And if you don't have an iPhone, if you simply, later go in and type in on a search your make and model of your phone and then type RF exposure. Let me just explain while you're getting your iPhones out. Go into settings, but we'll use a few different terms today that kind of all mean the same thing in general speak. RF is radio frequency microwave radiation. It's man-made energy. And it's also referred to as EMF, or electromagnetic fields. The electromagnetic fields are created as this man-made microwave radiation is pulsed out into our world. So we have EMF, we have RF, and we have man-made microwave radiation. It's all what we're talking about today. So from an iPhone, go into settings, scroll down just a little bit and hit general. On a really old phone, you would hit about, but most people have been talked into upgrading by now. So from general, scroll all the way down to the bottom and you'll see legal and regulatory. Hit that, and on the next window, you will see about 4 down, RF exposure. This is that radio frequency, man-made microwave radiation that in this legal fine print, they politely call energy. When we read the first few paragraphs, it tells us that this device was tested at a distance, from the body. And then further down, it says if you want to reduce your exposure to this man-made energy, use a hands-free option. And I'm going to just momentarily stop my screen share to show you when they say use a speakerphone or use a headset. There's one property about radiation that we should be aware of. It likes metal, it travels on metal, and it amplifies the radiation with metal. So there's a solution for everything. We'll present the problems, but my mom always taught me, if you see a problem, do your best to be part of the solution. So we're all about the solutions once we understand the facts. So this is something called a hollow tube or an air tube headset. It simply plugs into your device, and there are little adapters you can get. If your device doesn't have a direct connect like that, you can buy little tiny adapters. The signal goes from your phone or your tablet right up through the wire, and you can set the device far away from you because distance is your friend. And then it hits these 2 ferrite beads, which break the radiation, but still allow for the acoustics to come up into your head without any metal. These are just rubber tips. And then you have a bit safer connection, okay? So look for a hollow tube or an air tube headset. And it was really hard for me to get my mind around this issue because just like with the pandemic, it's an invisible exposure. And how do we even know we're being exposed? So I learned that there are devices that one can purchase to measure this invisible microwave radiation. So this is the device that was recommended at the EMF medical conference. And I know doctors who have purchased this, they put it into their practices. There's a doctor up here on the North Shore in Massachusetts who will do what she does to heal her patients or to teach them how to heal themselves. But if they go back home into a high microwave radiation environment, they're not going to stay well or be able to get over the hump to get well. So she bought one of these meters. She loans it to her patients for $10. And then she says, you've got 2 hours, go home, do your scavenger hunt, find out where all these exposures are in your home, and then come back and we'll teach you how to do baby steps to start looking at each exposure and think about what we can do to actually turn each one off and still be connected and have excellent technology. And we'll teach you that today too. So here in my home, after I stopped circling my tail and I figured out what I needed to do to have safe technology, one by one, I changed over everything in my house. And see how this is blinking green? That's the best we can hope for. So in the scientific literature, they want us to be at 10 or less on the middle number on this meter. Now, this is a Safe and Sound Pro 2 broadband radio frequency meter. And we want to be concerned with the maximum spike of radiation that's coming at us. In the scientific literature, they want us to be at 10 or less. Their unit of measurement is something called a microwatt per square meter. So within, 3 feet of air, we want to be at 10 or less. Because of what I've done to protect myself and my family, I'm at 1.7. So that's pretty good. That's a pretty safe level that my body can do normal cell repair and regeneration while I sleep at night to clean out the daily toxins. But I want to give you a demonstration of what happens when I take my cell phone out of airplane mode. I leave it there. I forward cell phone calls to my landline. When I'm not on the go, I don't need a cell phone. So the noise we hear is all of the antennas in this device, this one device, looking to make a handshake with the nearest, let me turn that down, with the nearest cell tower or router. And again, today's message is certainly not no technology. We live by it, but it's high time we be given the facts so that we can make safety choices. Okay, so that was quite enough. So I just turned my cell phone back into airplane mode. You see the radiation takes a moment or two to dissipate. And then I'm back into this safe flashing green level. But you want to know what we just did? Oh, mercy. I was at 1.7 in my home. I turned on my cell phone, which activated the cellular and data antenna, the Bluetooth antenna, the locator antenna, the Wi-Fi antenna, the hotspot antenna, and Bluetooth Wi-Fi locator. Yeah, so these devices have multiple antennas for all the different services they're selling us. Who would even know to think, well, I'm not using Bluetooth. Let me turn off that antenna and reduce my exposure. I'm not using Wi-Fi. Let me turn off that antenna and reduce my exposure. Gosh, I'm only testing. Why do I need the cellular and data antenna on? That one's a big wallop of radiation. So little baby steps we can learn, but we were at 1.7 microwatts per square meter. Just turning on my phone, all those different antennas making their handshake threw me over to the top of this meter at 2.5 million microwatts per square meter, 2.5 million. And the science wants us to be at 10 or less, not 10,000, but 10 microwatts or less. So that's kind of the electrosmog that we've surrounded ourselves with, but at least for the devices under our own control, we can learn a little bit. And when we know better, we can do better. So I'm going to go ahead and resume my screen share and give you some ideas about what you might be able to do, even in your own community. So you see on this slide, we've got these 2 meters. Back in 2016, not too many years after I figured out what was going on with wireless, I was the grant coordinator for our school district, and I knew we had a pot of money in our town that was redistributed out through a grant program. And so I put in an application to get a radiation detection meter. I wanted 2. I wanted to donate one to the schools to protect the kids and the staff, and I wanted to donate one to the public library so everybody could just borrow it and go home and see what's going on in their home, in their office, in their schools, in their cars. You know, anywhere we've got these radiation antennas, on the playing fields, at their doctor's office, just start gathering the data and then figure out what we do from there. It was hard. The first time I submitted my grant application, our board of select person said, well, we don't really understand this. Come back next time. The second time I reapplied, they said, gee, gosh, this is probably more of a Board of Health issue. And I had already met with our health agent here in our little town of Ashland, Massachusetts, and he knew there was harm from cell towers. He didn't understand Wi-Fi. And so I'm like, gosh, our town doesn't really even understand this. And so by then I had introduced a bill with Senator Spilka, and I learned after going up to the State House that our legislators were completely in the dark, and it takes a one-on-one conversation or training session for people to kind of get this issue, which is why we're doing these public education webinars and recording them so you guys can take them and go share them with whomever you think ought to know about this. By that time, I learned that a one-on-one is really critical. So I met with each member of our select board. One came to my house. Our kids had grown up together. I met another in a coffee shop. I met another at a new business that had just opened. I went to another's home where a second select board member met me there. And one by one, I showed them the science. One of our select board members is a retired police officer. And he said, Cece, you had me at hello, because he knew of so many police officers with the radar guns in the back of the cars early on that were blasting this microwave radiation, and the police officers were getting the brain tumors. Others got the tumors in the thigh from holding the radar guns on their lap while they were scanning passing by cars. So it wasn't easy, but ultimately our select board gave me enough funding to put one device on loan in our public library. And so that became a pilot program. And that was really early on in 2016. Today, most of our libraries now have a collection called the Library of Things, where you can maybe borrow a projector, or my daughter can borrow a power washer to clean her house with. Their board games and all sorts of fun things that can be loaned out in the community through the library. So we got that on loan in our library. When I went to the first medical conference in California, I met a doctor from Newton, Massachusetts. We came back and went after a Massachusetts Cultural Council grant, and we were able to put one on loan in her library. And it also funded us to do a screening of the award-winning film Generation Zapped in her library. We're actually going to do a screening of Generation Zapped here in Massachusetts in Upton on the 26th of June at 6:30 p.m. So if anybody's around and wants to come to that screening at the community center, we'll have that posted on our events page pretty soon. And then some of you may be aware that out in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, Verizon illegally constructed a cell tower right on top of a neighborhood that made the children and the adults so sick that they've had to abandon their homes. And they've been fighting this now for 3 years. And one of the citizens got up to give public comment to one of their local boards. And he said, you know, I've been doing my garden for 22 years here. And that first summer that cell tower went up, we had almost no pollinators. And he said by the second summer, we had no pollinators. So it's not just you and I, it's every biological cell on the planet that's impacted by this. And he said he had to go out and hand pollinate his garden because there were no birds, bees, pollinators in that community anymore. So Pittsfield funded out of their own budget one of these meters. And, you know, I did the Acoustimeter in 2016. It's still a very good meter and it's right on par with the Safe and Sound Pro 2, but this one just has a few more features, like you can plug it in using a charger from, I use my cell phone charger actually to plug that in, and then it doesn't wear down the battery if I'm just monitoring what's going on in my house. So it is really important to help make this invisible toxin visible. And a radio frequency meter can do that. These are in the $400 range, but there are like baby sister ones to each one. And if you go out to a place like Safe Living Technologies, they will tell you what is available today. And one of the last bastions of independent reporting that we have today is our local cable stations. And our cable station here in Ashland has been so gracious to us. They sent a gentleman here with his camera to my house, and I filmed a 23-minute public service announcement that did a walkthrough to just show kind of common everyday exposures that most people have today, and then simple suggestions for how to remediate. I also want to give a shout out to WCCA TV in Worcester, Massachusetts. They've recently invited me to do episodes with them twice a month. So I've got my own little program. It's nothing fancy, but just a way to share the facts and to convey current happenings with this EMF work. So WCCA is good too, and I should probably add that link before I send my slides. So what does the science tell us? When we look at the long-term effects, we see child and adult cancers, and our own government through the U.S. National Toxicology Program completed the largest study. And mind you, the NTP is arguably the world's gold standard on toxics research. The largest study they've ever done started about 20 years ago to see if cell phones could be harmful. That was the technology of the day. After an unprecedented 3-day peer review, after decades of study, they determined in their final report clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. So every time a good, highly credible study comes out, the industry gets a hold of it and says, oh, that's just one study. You need more than one study. And so we're just going to keep doing what we've been doing. Well, right on the heels of our government study, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy completed another large study on the other end on the cell towers. And guess what? They found the same cancers and DNA damage and other findings that we found here in the US. So science can always be improved, but we don't need more science. We know enough today through thousands of studies that this is highly toxic and it should be converted into public policy. And we'll talk about that in a minute. DNA damage, as we mentioned, that's the roadmap to grow a proper anything, a child, a plant, a pollinator, a biome. And we know scientifically this is damaging DNA. When I first started looking at this, I came across the infertility studies, and this is what got me on my feet. I learned that they have taken male human sperm, exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating, and it not only damaged the DNA, but it slowed the motility of the sperm, and it caused far fewer sperm to be viable, something that's called apoptosis or programmed cell death. And again, there's a whole new vocabulary I've learned that I didn't come into any of this knowing, but it's basically killing off the sperm. And if you go out and look a little more, you'll find that all of our industrialized, highly technological societies are down about 50% on our sperm count nationally. And this looks to be a huge contributor, because look where everybody's using and carrying their devices, right near their reproductive organs. And Kaiser Permanente and others have also come out with very credible studies, repeated, peer-reviewed, that talk about women's fertility issues, talking about higher miscarriage rates with women who use wireless technology. So that's where I found the courage to start looking into and speaking up about this issue. And then there's another body of science that talks about neurotoxicity. And, you know, for years, the industry would say, oh, there's no mechanism of harm. Let's keep doing what we're doing. But now, clearly, we know many mechanisms of harm. And with this neurotoxicity, what Dr. Pal Patcher and colleagues found is that we have something called the blood-brain barrier that protects the brain as toxins are being escorted out of the body through the bloodstream. We don't want those toxins going into the brain. So that blood-brain barrier would protect us. We have a gut barrier that should protect us. What Dr. Patcher and others discovered is that when we have these spiked erratic pulses of man-made microwave radiation, that is breaking the blood-brain barrier, causing holes in it. So when the blood's escorting the toxins out, it can now seep into these sensitive areas in the brain. And now we see these ever increasing rates of attention deficit disorder, ADHD, autism, Alzheimer's. For ADD, ADHD, Dr. Martha Herbert founded the Autism Lab at Massachusetts General Hospital. She's a Harvard pediatric neurologist. And she sees huge connections between what we know scientifically happens with radiation exposure, man-made microwave radiation exposure, and what's happening to the brains of the children and families in her care. So that's autism. ADHD, Dr. Hugh Taylor down at Yale Medical, he runs the OBGYN program down there, and he's done some of the rodent studies that showed when you expose the pregnant mice to microwave radiation, the pups come out bouncing off the walls of the cage, much like a child with attention deficit disorders. So we have a ton of science on this. Dr. Martin Pall has culled the science on Alzheimer's and has identified that over these years that we've begun with this electropollution and other environmental exposures, that what used to be something that happened over the course of many years and started showing up in our 70s and 80s with Alzheimer's is now happening sooner. We're now getting Alzheimer's in our 60s, our 50s, our 40s, our 30s, and even in some rare cases in our 20s. So it's very important that we learn about this and we take precautions, because the the brain does have some neuroplasticity and can regenerate some of these cells, but sometimes it's too late. So it's critically important. And we're very grateful when more mainstream groups start putting resources and acquiring funding to help get the word out about the biological impact that this environmental pollutant is having from microwave radiation. So we're very grateful to the Environmental Working Group. As a mom, I first found their work because every year they put out something called the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. These are lists that they put out to guide us on what produce we should try and buy organically if we can, and which ones that are grown with chemicals where the edible part is more shielded. That would be on the Clean 15 versus the Dirty Dozen. So I knew about their work, and in recent years they've been refunded and they're starting to do work again on microwave radiation exposures. They've come up with some really good fact sheets. This is one, protecting kids from wireless radiation in school and at home. And then this one talks about the nervous system and neurotoxicity. So please use these resources. All these links will take you where we've been speaking. And then we have to know that children are especially vulnerable. They're not just little adults. Dr. Om Gandhi is one of the EMS scientists, and he's done this modeling to show us how much radiation does actually absorb into our brains. So these head models up here are turned sideways. So the little yellow dot is the ear. So when an adult puts a cell phone right up to the head, which is how we use our phones mostly, you can see that that radiation penetrates and microwaves the brain about a third of the way through. Children have thinner skulls and their brain has a higher water content. And if you think about your microwave oven, it's that water content that, that moves and heats. And that's what we know is also helping to cause damage. You don't actually have to have heat to have harm from microwaves or radio frequency radiation. But that's just an analogy. So when a child's brain has a higher water content, they are biologically absorbing more of this radiation into their brain. On a 10-year-old, it's going about 3/4 of the way into the child's brain. And on a 5-year-old, we see that penetrates almost the entire brain of the child. So we need to be very, very mindful of exposing our children, not only directly, but to our secondhand radiation as well. So those were many of the long-term biological effects. But when we talk about the short-term effects, a lot of people today are starting to notice, but never would they know to connect their symptoms to man-made microwave radiation. So we should know that the Americans with Disabilities Act has recognized electromagnetic sensitivities since the early 2000s. We should also know that when you and I were kids, sleeping, and when we were teenagers, sleeping was what we did best, right? And now we get reports of so many kids and teenagers and adults who simply don't sleep well anymore. And now we know that this is a leading factor in that. What the science shows us as the mechanism is that during the wee hours of darkness, our circadian rhythm runs off of a 24-hour cycle. In the wee hours of darkness at night, during sleep, the pineal gland releases melatonin. Melatonin goes in to regulate our sleep and also helps to do some of that cleanup through the bloodstream of the everyday wear and tear and the debris that comes along with that. What the science is showing is that our brain can't distinguish between this man-made light energy form and natural daylight. So the brain's over there going do, waiting for it to get dark as this microwave radiation pulses day and night. And so the brain doesn't properly release the melatonin in many cases. And then it dysregulates our sleep. And then when we don't get proper sleep, we have this whole domino effect of what starts happening to our health. So insomnia is a huge one. But the good news is, after a little bit of education and training on this, people say, I didn't want to know about this. I didn't want to believe it. And I'm like, yeah, welcome to the club. None of us did. But they took a chance and they turned it all off at night. They forwarded their cell phones to the landline. They turned off the router. They turned off their wearables, or at least the antennas on them. They put their cell phone and their tablets and their Roku and their Chromecast, everything in airplane mode, measure to make sure there's no radiation sneaking in. And then they'll say, wow, I slept for the first time in ages. Or my children's behavior issues calmed way down. Or the headaches and the nosebleeds and ear bleeds, the chronic fatigue, the pain from unidentified sources. All those things start to remediate when we give our bodies a chance to do that important cell repair and regeneration at night. Otherwise, our cells only have so much energy in them that's pretty well calibrated to do, regular energy to get us through the day, cell repair and regeneration at night. And when we add on this toxic burden of, oh my gosh, I'm constantly bombarded with radiation, it makes it really hard for our cells to do what they're here to do for us when they're up against that constant bombardment of man-made radiation. So a lot of people will recognize the skin abnormalities. Some people talk about the hot ear when they put a cell phone up to their ear. For me, if I hold a radiating device, my pinky finger starts to tingle. Some people get flushing of the skin, rashes, and itching and burning. So we have little antennas in the surface of our skin that help us to read our environment and navigate our way through. And we're showing in the science now that this man-made pulsation of radiation is not only affecting the skin, but that skin is connected to so many of our organs too. So it travels, the harm travels not just at the skin surface, but into our bodies as well. And then heartbeats that go too fast or too slow, depending on your own body's individual proclivity. And remember, this is an electrical magnetic field that we're imposing on the electrical organs of our bodies. And it's very easy to get overpowered. Our lungs, our hearts, our brains, that's why we do EEGs and EKGs to measure those electrical pulses in our own bodies. And when we get microwave, that dysregulates our own biological electrical circuitry. Cognitive impairment is a big one. It used to be as we age, we'd open the fridge and go, what did I come in here for, right? But now it's not just as we age, it's people of all ages are suffering from cognitive impairment. And then anger and behavior issues. So we are seeing, actually it was at the EMF medical conference that this really came to light, that the doctors said, if we don't stop radiating our society, we can expect many more of these societal outbursts that we've been seeing, because what the science is showing is this microwaving of our brains is changing the gray matter and the white matter of the brain, where the areas are for executive function and learning and all of that, and we're changing it. And so they said at the medical conference that we can expect to see more of these mass shootings and other public outbursts. And during the pandemic, we were getting headlines here in Boston that these issued tablets that were given to all the kids to access their education once the kids got back into the classroom, there were several schools reporting that kids were literally wailing on one another with their Chromebooks because they couldn't regulate their behavior. And we're radiating our kids and their brains. And so, we've gotten ourselves into a pretty tight, dark alley here. Anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. We were already at epidemic levels before the pandemic. And then we gave everybody a wireless device with no safety instruction. So another biological effect that we know of, and probably why my pinky finger tingles when I hold a radiating device, there's something in the science called the rouleau effect. And I remember that one in my little brain, because it's kind of like the candy Rolos, that stack of chocolate caramels. Our red blood cells are meant to be free floating and bringing oxygen out to all of our biological systems, right? bring the oxygen in. It helps to regulate everything in our bodies. What happens when we constantly expose ourselves to electric and magnetic fields? Well, those red blood cells should be free floating. Then they start clumping together and glomming together into this strand that then can't properly navigate its way to bring oxygen up to all of our organs and systems. So we know scientifically that this radiation is causing oxidative stress. And it also causes something like reactive oxygen species, ROS, which is Dr. Cindy Russell, who founded Physicians for Safe Technology. She says it's like we're rusting ourselves from the inside out because we're not getting oxygen to where it needs to be, and we're rusting ourselves. So we have all the science to show that it's doing this to us, and it's not just to us, it's every biological cell on the planet works off of these electrical impulses. And so what's it doing to our pollinators, our birds, our bees, our moths, you know, every living system out there? Well, we are seeing our pollinators disappear by the dozens, species disappearing by the dozens. When they did 5G testing in The Hague in the Netherlands, there were reports of birds dropping right out of the sky. We saw similar reports on cruise ships when they started putting these big, powerful antennas on top of the ships, that the birds would be drawn to the lights or other energies there. And then all of a sudden they start dropping down to the deck of the ship. So it's not just you and I, it's every living species. And for those concerned about energy consumption, you should know that as far back as 2012, there was a Greenpeace analyst who indicated if the cloud were a country, it would be the 5th largest consumer of energy in the world. And we've done nothing in the last decade to address that, but introduce more and more and more infrastructure and wireless devices. So you can also go into this planetary impact link and see what the humanitarian tolls are to get all the minerals. There are dozens that go into each one of our devices, and they are doing human atrocities to get those out of the Congo and elsewhere. All these data warehouses and networks and our personal devices consume so much energy. Streaming consumes vast quantities of energy. Use a hardwired connection, folks, and it's not rocket science. It's simply choosing to plug back in with Ethernet cables and adapters if you don't still have an Ethernet port on your devices. Who knew? For $20 or $30, you can buy a Lightning to Ethernet adapter for an iPhone. There are similar adapters at the same price points that you can get for other makes and models. So it's not rocket science to fix. So download, turn off the antennas, and then you can watch your content at your own pace without radiating yourself and everyone around you. Every time we send and receive, we're using energy, and then we charge and we recharge and we recharge all of these wireless devices. Simply plug them in and you will consume far less energy. And take a look at all the apps that, you know, they sound fun and sexy, and you probably put them on your device, but honestly, do you really use them all the time? If not, take them off, because they're in the background continuously using energy to do updates. So little tiny baby steps we can all take and collectively start reducing our exposures. But again, excellent resources for you to come learn about that here. So as I was getting deeper and deeper into the science and seeing the fallout in our society, I kept thinking, surely somebody's got to have our backs on this. So why don't we know about this? And it was in 2015 when Harvard Law School Center for Ethics published this free online report called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission, which is supposed to be regulating this, is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates. And it made it very clear that we have a revolving door in many of our federal agencies where they're supposed to be protecting you and I in the public interest and public health and safety. And instead, we've got this revolving door of industry executives coming in to head up our federal agencies. And so they have captured the Food and Drug Administration. They have captured the Federal Communications Commission, the EPA, the CDC, and others. And there is nobody in Washington, D.C. protecting you and I today. So that was when I went, uh-oh, I guess I better start trying to help with this issue. And more recently in November, ProPublica came out with a really good article that, recently investigated how the FCC shields the cell phone companies from safety concerns. And ProPublica has put out a number of really good articles recently. And so when we talked about that $30 million study that we did at the National Institutes of Health, once those findings of clear evidence of harm came out, clear evidence is the highest of 5 formal categories that they can assign. That should have triggered public policy to take those findings and translate it into something that would protect you and I. So that study was started 2 decades ago. The gentleman who's in charge of radiation at the FDA today is somebody altogether different. Those guys are all long gone who knew about this issue. Dr. Jeffrey Shuren is in charge today. And when you go and look into his background, you don't have to look far to see that he's married to a woman who is a partner in a law firm that represents the wireless industry and other big industries. So he should have been nowhere near that National Toxicology Program study. And yet, what did he do? He went right over to the FCC and said, oh, don't pay any attention to that National Toxicology Program study. We don't think it's true. We don't believe it. Keep doing what you're doing. Right? So these conflicts of interest can exist at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level. And unfortunately, it goes all the way to the top at the World Health Organization. I was presenting at the Dover-Sherborne Public Schools here in Massachusetts to their wellness committee, and we were in the conference room with maybe a dozen teachers and people on their committee. And as I'm sharing the evidence, there was one gentleman who was fact-checking me on his tablet. And I had shared that the New York Times put out an article that said that, oh, it's just the Russians fear-mongering again. There's nothing wrong with 5G. And when I mentioned the World Health Organization, he started fact-checking me on that too. And he said, oh, look, the World Health Organization says, it's inconclusive, keep doing what we're doing. And I said, well, yes, and that page that you're looking at that comes up first is out of date. I can provide you with a link that will show you that when the National Toxicology Program and the Ramazzini Institute published their findings of clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage, the WHO opened up their investigation again, because in 2011, they had enough evidence of harm to classify this as a group 2B possible human carcinogen. They were missing the animal studies at that time, and now that we have them, the WHO has reopened their investigation to look at infertility, to look at the impact on children, to look at the impact on the environment and electrosensitivities and other areas. But you won't find that easily, because there are 2 groups at the World Health Organization. One is heavily backed by industry, and the other is the highly qualified scientists and doctors who are trying to do their jobs. So the corruption goes all the way to the top, but we can provide you with the facts to help dispel all the disinformation that the industry commonly gives to our towns, our legislators, as they dangle these dollar signs in front of them to install toxic wireless radiation. So folks, that's all the bad news. And it's bad, but there are solutions at every turn. Some are low-hanging fruit that we can take control of ourselves. Others take a huge dash of courage to open up this conversation with others. So let's start with the simplest ones. What can you do with the devices that are under your control. There's a little 3-step process here to hardwire. And all that means is to go look at your router, modem, whatever you've got there, and you will find Ethernet ports. All you need to do is get a big long